press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.
Prime Minister Modi's visit to the U.S. We are joined by Amatendu Palit. He's a South Asia Affairs analyst, and he joins us live from Singapore. Great to have you with us. Washington says it's not going to bring up the visa issue, but Modi might. How is that likely to play out?
I think this is bound to come up in the conversation between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. There's hardly any possibility of this being overlooked, because among the bilateral issues that are at the forefront of the US-India relations, the H-1B visas and the movement of Indian IT professionals to the United States continues to remain a major factor. But having said that, my perception is that this probably is being a bit overplayed in the current juncture, in the sense that the United States has, I think, on a couple of times assured that it is not going to stop entry of good Indian people into the United States. And on the other hand, the Indian major IT companies have also clarified that their employment and growth prospects are not entirely dependent on the H-1B visa program. But having said that, I think the bigger concern is that jobs are very important for both countries. And for India, which is a country that probably can claim to have the largest number of young, skilled population in the world, it is important that its people travels to jobs, and the United States is a major market in the world for that. While on the other hand, for the United States, and particularly for President Trump, creating jobs and making more jobs for Americans is a very important election promise that he has to live up to. So it boils down to a situation where Prime Minister Modi and President Trump have to really exchange views on a candid note to see if there are ways in which their mutual concerns can be effectively addressed.
Well, you're absolutely right about jobs, and certainly they do share a very similar philosophy. Modi touted the phrase "made in India," and Trump, of course, always says hire American, buy American. That's the way that he wants his economy to go. So certainly they both have a focus on their own countries in terms of the economy and jobs. But how do you see the U.S.-India relationship playing out under the Trump administration?
You see, I think, let's put it this way. As far as Mr. Modi is concerned, this is the fifth time that he has gone back to the United States over the last 3 years since he became the Prime Minister. He shared a good personal rapport and a nice chemistry with the earlier president, Mr. Obama. But these are relations like the US-India relations. These are relations between two big countries. They are not really entirely personality dependent. And what I mean by that is that the US and India have very clear points of strategic convergence, which is on the geopolitical side. They have common concerns with respect to terrorism, with respect to cybersecurity. They agree on the virtues of democracy, rule of law, and institutions. But having said that, bilaterally, they have a large ground to cover, particularly when it comes to economics and business. There are concerns over jobs that we addressed earlier, and also there are concerns over how India will address the intellectual property right and patents issues, particularly with respect to pharma products like stents, over which the US big pharma has been particularly unhappy that India has been controlling the price of stents. And there is also, on the global and regional front, the question of clean energy and how the two countries addresses together, because with the United States backing out of the Paris Agreement and India being seen as one of the major movers and shakers of the clean energy and solar power movement across the world, there will be some element of tension or if one can put it that way, efforts to understand each other's perspectives to address these issues, because as big countries, big economies, they cannot be oblivious to global and regional concerns, but at the same time, their own individual concerns are big enough for them to actually keep themselves very extensively preoccupied.
And particularly, I remember during the
Yeah.
U.S. presidential election, there were a lot of concerns from CEOs in Silicon Valley about what Trump's immigration policies would mean. And I'm just going back to that for a second, because it would seem that India would stand to gain a lot, especially since it has been stepping up a very large role in becoming at the forefront of technology, but also just simply the fact that these CEOs of these companies are extremely worried about losing these workers.
I think that is a concern with respect to not only the CEOs of IT companies in the US, but to an extent that's probably a concern that's being shared by many other companies in the United States who are expecting temporary or short stay skilled labor to be an important part of their growth story. And I think there are concerns that because of a shortage in the supply of seasonal workers in certain industries like hospitality and tourism in the United States, these industries are actually not as robust as they were before. But coming back to the question of IT workers, yes, I think at some stage, much as we now see no change having yet come in the existing rules and regulations. I think at some stage, both the United States and American governments have to really take this on board and look at it as something which can be an impediment to the bilateral relations, because it's very important to say and agree on a number of geopolitical issues. That is fine, and nobody denies the US-India geopolitical convergence on a number of issues. But then if matters don't move bilaterally, it sends a signal to both countries, their constituencies and businesses, that irrespective of their strategic commonality in visions, there are areas where breakthroughs are going to be very, very difficult. So even if there is some movement on at least measures like a totalization agreement, which US and India have been discussing for a long time, which essentially means that the IT companies from India that are working in the United States are exempted from payment of social security contributions for their employees who are short-term. Even such gestures or even movement on those fronts, or at least if we leave the IT issue aside, even a solid substantive movement on the civil nuclear deal between the United States and India would actually indicate that the line and ground for business is open, because otherwise it will remain a relationship which agrees on fundamentals but finds it very difficult to move on the brass tacks.
Amitad Dupalat, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us.